get by. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I feel like 100 grand.
You are listening to Inspired Insider with your host, Dr. Jeremy Wise.
Dr. Jeremy Wise here, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders, and today is no different. I have John Capuano, and John is the founder of Lone Beacon. And John, I always like to point out other episodes people should check out of the podcast. We were just chatting before we hit record about John Warrillow and his book, Built to Sell. He was a guest on the podcast. Check it out. They have a podcast too. And John has sold his company, John, who I'm talking to, not John Warrillow. And so we're going to talk about that and the interesting tales behind that a little bit. Also, John has been in the agency space for almost a decade now. I did an episode with Kevin Hurrigan, and he's at an agency since 1995. So it was really interesting to see the evolution. And also, we were talking about digital transformation and what that means. And there's been a lot of digital transformation over the past decade and since 1995. So it's interesting to hear that and that many more on InspiredInsider.com. And this episode is brought to you by Rise 25. At Rise 25, we help businesses give to and connect their Dream 100 partnerships and relationships. And how do we do that? We actually help you run your podcast. We're an easy button for a company to launch and run a podcast. We do the accountability, the strategy, and the full production execution behind the podcast. We call ourselves, John, kind of the magic elves that work in the background to make sure everything, makes it look easy for the host and the company. They could just have the conversation and run their business. So, for me, the number one thing in my life is relationships. I'm always looking at ways to give to my best relationships. And I've found no better way over the past decade to profile the people and companies I most admire and share with the world what they're working on. So if you have questions and you've thought about podcasting, go to rise25.com and to learn more. And I'm excited to introduce John Capuano. Like I said, he's the founder of Lone Beacon. And Lone Beacon is one of the top sales and marketing companies for high-end financial advisories and institutions in America. They work with about 75 financial advisories and institutions. They generate 30,000 leads. That equates to a lot of money, John. It's like more than $20 billion in leads. They deliver 15 million emails per year. They've recently been acquired, as I mentioned, by the Simplicity Group, financial service conglomerate holding company. And we'll dig into that and Lone Beacon. And John, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Jeremy. Super psyched to be here. I'm a fan of the show.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that. And that means a lot because you have like over a decade experience in radio. You work for CBS Radio. And I want to start with just talking about Lone Beacon and what you do.
Well, our roots in broadcasting go back to the early 90s. And that's where I met co-founder Greg Dinetz, where we were working at WOR radio network in New York. And we did a ton of business with in the financial sector. And we learned back then a lot about the industry, particularly how underserved it was for financial. And I'm not sure why, maybe because ad agencies don't find it very sexy, or maybe there's so much regulation in it. It's just a very tricky one. And Greg and I, way back then, thought, gee, they need to be better served. And then finally, in 2012, Greg called me, who owned radio stations at that time, and said, hey, why don't we quit our jobs and what business should we start? And we didn't have to take very long to say, gee, this is a really necessary industry to carve out, particularly because of one of the things we learned in talk radio was media consumption with the baby boomer demographic and consumer behavior. And we wanted to just apply that to the financial industry. And so we began our company in 2013 as largely coming from the broadcast space, a company to start infomercials. So the first iteration of us was in the broadcast business as it relates to financial, but we really wanted to morph into the digital space, and that's what we have become today.
Do you remember Ron Popeil?
Yeah, totally.
So I had Ron Popeil on the podcast. You mentioned infomercial. So talk about what I want to talk about the evolution of the services for a minute, because I know you start off, a lot of companies start off with one service and they grow from there. What was the kind of the first version for Loan Beacon?
Greg hates when I tell this story.
That means it's going to be a good one.
We went to a financial convention as radio hosts or radio consultants, and we decided to, and we had no clients and we had no money, and so our big investment was we rented like this humongous monitor, and which I can't remember how much it was, but it was like, holy cow, they charge a lot for these things at hotels. And
it's exorbitant. Exactly.
Yeah. And we built a Photoshop website of what we thought the best financial website should look like. And we had it on it roll through a PowerPoint. And so it looked like an actual website. And so people were coming by our booth thinking they were going to talk about radio. And we're like, you really need a good website. We had no idea how to build one.
What year is this?
2013.
Okay.
Maybe 2014. And so, but we figured how hard could it be? And so anyway, and from an ergonomic standpoint, we believe that it would be like somebody should have this style website. And lo and behold, someone came to us after the convention, was like, guys, I really liked your website. I'll take one. And so then we had to figure out, okay, now we have to find somebody to kind of put this thing together. And we did. His name's Kirby Mack, and he's our vice president of digital development. And he's still with us today. We hired him away from where he was. And it was crazy building it, and it took maybe 60 days to build it. And we were like literally schoolgirls running around the day it launched, and it was such a huge event. Now it's like we'll launch probably 100 a year, and we launched it, and then the next day we got a call from our client, and he's like, guys, I got to tell you, and we were trembling. And he said, I got a lead on my website on the first day. I've been in business for 20 years, and I never got a lead before this. I don't know how you did it, but you did it. And we talk about schoolgirls. We jumped up and down in one another's arms, and we're like, we've done it. Little did we know how much more we had to learn. But anyway, that was our first foray.
So it started off with a website.
Right.
I was not expecting that.
Yeah. What did you expect?
Well, you have so much experience in kind of radio sales, and I thought it was going to be maybe brokering deals with radio stations for infomercials.
We did plenty of that. And it's funny how we tend to gloss over that, because that still is a considerable part of our business. I think it's almost second nature to us, but something very interesting that we learned. It's also interesting that you mentioned Ron Popeil, because in a very nerdy way, he is a hero to us. And the whole thing about as I'm sure you know, the turn and the carnival and all of that stuff, Midway. And we applied a lot of that to broadcasting in terms of how do you capture somebody's attention right away before they flip the channel? And we had become good at that because it was our business, and we sold lots of it through the media companies that we worked for. And so oddly, from a broadcast standpoint, they were in the financial business. They were kind of slapping it together, and they were getting not great advice on it. So that part was kind of easy to us. When we started to morph into more digital, what we learned was those same principles that Ron Popeil had are the tenets of the digital space. And so what doesn't exist, or what hadn't existed, at least in the financial business, was when people put a digital ad together, they might be good from a technical standpoint in how do you filter a buy and how do you put a buy together. But ultimately, the words that you put together are like, that's the essence of, like, that's what Ron Popeil says, right? It's like, how do you capture their attention like that? And so we applied the same, and at first we were almost self-conscious about it because, that was yesterday's technology and now digital is different. And a lot of people told us you need to use it differently. But the reality is what we learned about capturing the attention of the consumer in the broadcast business is exactly the same that you would in front of somebody having a conversation, or in any medium that you would choose. And so we applied a lot of that to our digital business and virtually everything that we do. And I think that sets us apart a little bit, because I think that's lost in the modern era of marketing.
Direct response is direct response. I geek out on the top direct response marketers, and that's why Ron Popeil was one of the top of my list to talk about how do you sell. He's got some amazing stories of waking up at like 4 a.m, prepping vegetables and doing selling on the street face to face with like the Chop-O-Matic. It was incredible.
It's nuts.
Go ahead. And
at the end of the day, that's all anyone wants. And that's what it boils down to. And I think at our leads, and, we'll have conversations with literally the largest financial institutions in the world, and we'll ask them, what's the most important thing that you need? And they'll say, we need leads. And that's what virtually every business wants, no matter what kind of business you're in. You need someone walking in your door. And that's it always is going to boil down to that. And I think that's lost a lot, and people try and get too fancy about it. And it's a very binary act. It's like, capture somebody's attention, get them to understand what you want. And now the beauty of digital allows us to look behind the curtain and watch their consumer behavior, to find out how they're engaging with all of your content, to find out when is the best time to really get them to walk in the door.
I love how you focus, John, on results, right? And you're like, yes, you want leads, we can accomplish them with all these things, but ultimately it's about leads. So early on, you would help them create websites, and you still do that for lead purposes. You'll help get them on radio for lead purposes. What other services, walk me through, again, other services that you added and started doing over the past decade for this purpose of just getting results and leads?
So it's broken down ultimately in 4 areas. Number one is building websites and creating the content on websites that people need to engage. And we look at it as your storefront. And to, many of us, we look at it like, you need a good website, but I don't know why, but a lot of people feel like they could skimp out on a website. And the fact of the matter is, on your website, you could have thousands of people a day coming to your website. You would never have that many people coming into your retail establishment. Also, the way you can use data from a website is amazing. And we'll use this analogy. If you were a sporting goods store and across the street was another sporting goods store, how valuable would it be to understand your analytics, like where people are coming from to shop at your store? When they come into your store, are they coming to the golf department, or are they coming to the sneaker department? And what are they consuming? And all of that kind of stuff. All of that, you can learn all that from the analytics on your website, but so few people are really mining that data to learn, to get insight on what your consumers want. And so a big part of of what we do, and we need to start with, you need great content on a website, and you need to look at the analytics. So website is number one. Number two is generating leads at the top of the funnel, and you can't do that without having a receptacle, and that receptacle is the website. And so we generate leads via broadcast. By and large, it's via digital, whether it's Facebook or LinkedIn or Instagram or search or banner, all kinds of stuff. And once we capture those leads in the funnel, then it's on to the third thing that we concentrate on, and that is email marketing and automation and data. And that is where I would say a lot of the magic comes in, because a lead is very superficial, and the reality is most leads aren't going to act. And the way that what we learned after years of mining leads coming in is learning about the data is if we could get 10% of those leads coming in to act on something, we're so far ahead of the game. And a lot of our clients in the beginning were so myopic that they would look at 100 leads and be like, 90 of these leads absolutely sucked. You guys don't know what you're doing. And we're like, and we at the beginning we're like, I guess we suck, until we figured out that 10% is pretty good.
It's like baseball, right? It's like you're a Hall of Famer if you're
Right.
batting 300. Well, you got out 7 out of 10 times in that situation.
Right. And if you can get on base 10% of the time here, you're buying a yacht, basically. And so
that should be the tagline on your website.
Right. So then from that data that we capture, we will create rules-based systems, which I know this might be controversial, but we'll attach cookies to opt-in people. And it really, I believe, as a consumer, I like when I get served information that I want. It makes the experience better. And so we try to respectfully do that. One of the things that we learned when we did that, and we're really, we didn't want to be spamming people and giving them too much content. But what we learned was the more thoughtful content that we would give them, their engagement actually rose. The open rates and click-through rates dramatically increased as we gave them more content, because they liked what they were getting and it became user-friendly. Part of that process also allowed us to score the engagement of people, and this all falls under email marketing. So we have a 90-day rolling scoring average algorithm that can tell us when people are have the highest intent to set an appointment, and then we send out different information to them, and that allows us to really increase the likelihood of closing business for our clients, because there's nothing behind a curtain anymore at that point. And then that's number 3. And the fourth thing that we do, and we didn't realize this was going to be part of our business, is practice management. We assumed that everybody really was going to spend the time and attention to and have the care in running their business. But the reality is, businesses big and small, sometimes it's a luxury to create those infrastructures that are necessary to really grow. And as a matter of survival, we looked at practice management as a way for us to not get fired and not squander those leads. So as they were coming in, for the initial people that were saying, gee, 90 of these people sucked, it's like, well, wait a minute, let's look at those 10 people and what are our internal systems in place and sales methodologies that we might be better at executing the sales process.
Yeah, because also if the call or email isn't handled properly, you did your job, but that could fall through the cracks, and then it's a wasted opportunity.
Yep.
What are some big mistakes you've seen firms make from the practice management side? Because this probably applies to a lot of companies, I imagine.
Yeah. Not understanding how much time it takes to be successful, being too busy to stop down, and scaling is like running a franchise. And McDonald's would never have had a franchise if they didn't figure out how to, a Big Mac is the same process in Indianapolis as it is in New York City, as it is in Los Angeles. And that's no easy feat. And I think, by the nature of some business owners and founders, they inherently are mavericky and wonderful rainmakers. That's not always the same thing that's required to build and scale a business. And so, I think a lot of times they need help with just those foundational things, and that's where we come in.
Yeah, having a lack of process and implementing those.
And it's too easy to just want to move on to the next. How am I going to make my next, revenue growth happen? But then such a big part of what we do is around digital transformation. And just like I'm sure, when cavemen were around, when the first person rubbed two sticks together and made fire, like if somebody asked me today to rub two sticks together to make fire, I'd freeze to death. And I'd be like, this does not work.
Survival of the fittest, you'd be dead.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that there were the naysayers at that point. That exists stunningly today in our world, where people are like, it's just too much of a hassle. I'd rather do it this way rather than to embrace the world that we live in. And, we were talking a little bit earlier about, us being a digital company, and we are largely a digital company, but we're no more of a digital company than virtually any other business in the world, because as long as we all have our world on our cell phone, we're all in the digital business.
So, John, we talked about, helping financial advisories and institutions, and it seems like you've been really disciplined and focused on just that. And I'd love to hear your thought on niching. Did you ever, because I'm sure there's other companies that have come to you throughout the years, say, hey, can you help us? I know you've helped these other people. Talk about the discipline of niching for you and your company.
It's a great question. And I never heard this before, but there's riches in niches. Have you ever heard that expression? Okay, well, I just learned it and now I use it all the time, but there are. When we were in the broadcast business, when Greg and I were talking about forming this business, at that moment in time, we had dozens, if not hundreds, of different types of business that would run through our stations, and we would try and market. And it was almost like skimming a stone on a pond, where you do this and you'd run to another one and run to another one. And we said, gee, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could invest all of our intellectual property in just one business? How much better could we do? And then we looked, and then didn't take long for us to know that this business was the one. And I think for us anyway, we looked at, frankly, the profit margins in this versus if we were selling Hallmark cards to close business. It's a lot more. I'm not saying that's not a good business to be in, but you have to sell a lot more Hallmark cards than you do when you gather assets, moving them to financial institutions to turn a profit. So we have conversations all the time with our advisories and institutions about niches for them, niches within niches. And, we look at, there's a lot of niches that aren't being served. We think business to business is a really big niche. When you look at how many people own businesses, we don't see a lot of people on a retail level communicating to business owners to be like, you have a different lifestyle than 90% of the people that in the world. But there's still plenty of business owners. people need to hear as a business owner something very specific about how you can help them. And especially today, and that just happens to be one, but like at the end of the day, in the in niches, we're so bombarded with messages and information. You need something specific to break through to you. Otherwise, nothing's going to sink in at all.
Yeah. You feel like they're talking to me. This is for me. I want to talk about attracting talent and keeping talent. You mentioned Kirby, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I love to hear how you've attracted. I mean, with great companies, there's great people behind them. How do you attract talent and keep talent? Because you mentioned we got Kirby and he's still with us today. So what are some of the things that you do to attract talent and then keep talent?
First of all, it's the thing that we're proudest of. There's a little over 30 people on our staff today, and the tenure of them has been really great. And there's nothing more important than that. And I'll say it's as selfless as it is selfish, because the more you understand that, the more they're going to stick around and want to be a part of something. And so when people walk in the door, we'll say that, my job is to make this part of your life as great as it can possibly be. And I'm here to serve you. And whether you want to be the CEO of our company one day, or if you want to be just have the job that you have and leave every day at 5:30, it doesn't make any difference to me at all. I'm just so long as we have an understanding, and I'm here to help you do that very well and make this fun and for you and help fulfill that obligation. And so if you decide that you want to be here and leave work behind at 5:30, we manage people's career path that way because we want them to stick around. And if somebody wants to continue to grow, that's awesome. And then we spend more time with them doing, like helping, coaching them to get to that point. And it's a really, really big part of our culture. And everyone understands that we're all in it together, regardless of what your personal or career path is. We're all here to help one another. And it starts by being good people and caring about one another. And I know that sounds really, really corny, and you have to walk that walk every day, and you have to remind yourself and everyone around you that there's nothing more important than that. Because, I think of, we have kids that are 30 now, they're twins. And when they started their careers, I think about how, I would want their employers to treat them and what kind of environment I would want. And then all for them. And also, do I want, maybe the best thing for them isn't working 60 hours a week. Maybe that's not the kind of life they want. It's just about serving them as an employer so you can have a good understanding that way. And that's worked pretty well.
John, I know with, niching, getting the services down, the people, the process, I want to talk about acquisition for a second. And how did because that makes it very attractive to an acquirer with all these pieces. How did the acquisition come about?
Well, we announced about 30 days ago that we were acquired by the Simplicity Group, which we're super excited about. And as Greg has always said, we've never had a for sale sign on our backs. And we didn't. And, I think that a problem today is people get enamored with the notion of, how soon can I sell my business and when can I ring that bell, versus keeping your nose to the grindstone, and good things, are going to happen if they're supposed to happen, and it forces you to build value. And if it ends up getting sold, it ends up getting sold. And so we were approached and about a year ago, and culturally and intellectually, we couldn't possibly have been more compatible. They were what we saw was missing in the financial world. they're still run very mom and pop-ish in the distribution platforms. We saw an opportunity for it to become more institutionalized and share resources at a more, frankly, sophisticated level. And they absolutely are those people to be able to do that. And after lots of conversations, we decided to join forces, and we couldn't be more excited about it.
How did they discover you? Because you did have a for sale sign, you didn't put it out there.
I think we were a well-known commodity in the industry, so that was good, and just this, I guess, the stars aligned. I started to personally get more aggressive about my social media presence, and the CEO, Bruce Donaldson, reached out to me on LinkedIn. And then the next thing you know, Greg and I met with Bruce and gang, and we just had very, organic conversations and philosophical conversations, and which led to serious opportunity and aspirational conversations. And here we are.
I'd love for you to speak about the integration process, right? Because you have two separate companies. And, throughout the years of interviewing people always really talk about, and it seems to stick out with focusing on how important the integration process is.
We happen to have a lot of experience with this in the broadcast business because we lived through, and Greg's family was a big part of the consolidation business and M&A in broadcast. And I was on the other end, where working for broadcast entities who, like every other week, somebody else was owning our company, and we were clumped together with another group of who used to be competitors, and now we're brothers and sisters. It's exactly like bringing somebody, a human, into Lone Beacon is the same thing as it is bringing Lone Beacon into a large holding company. The same tenets apply. Communication and organization, having one another's backs and putting our hands in the middle and having a common goal. Also understanding that phrase I use a lot is, if you want to grow a business, it's like riding a bucking bronco, and sometimes you're going to get tossed off the bronco. And I kind of like that. I like the feeling of being on a bucking bronco, and we were able to create that culture here at Lone Beacon. And it freaks me out when I feel like the bronco is just kind of like walking or stopping to eat hay. And so culturally, we're used to that, and not afraid to make mistakes, and understand that progress doesn't come without challenges. Culturally, we're all wired the same way. And so everybody's, we sit across the table from one another and expect that, okay, we're riding the bucking bronco together. We need to communicate, and we need to plan well. And, and that's pretty much the essence.
On the flip side, John, like when you were in radio and you saw a lot of these integrations, and maybe they didn't go as smoothly, and maybe someone's listening and they're going to be integrated, or they're buying a company, they're going to have to do integration. What are some of the mistakes that you saw were made maybe with previous companies?
People being selfish and trying to covet that's number one. Just trying to covet their ideas and their piece of the fiefdom, versus looking at it like we're all in it together for the greater good. That's super important. Communication is never more important than when change is happening. And let's face it, over the past few years, we've seen lots and lots of change. So, I tell people to treat me like I'm a nervous fifth grader and that's the way we should treat all of our clients. Like, assume that people are freaked out all the time about everything, and to allay any concerns that they might have. So communication super, super important right now, part of the process. And then not trying to be perfect. Nobody gets a trophy for being the best organized. So I want to be really, really organized, but we, like to figure out 75% of the path forward and understand and have everybody accept the fact that we're going to see game time changes as we go, because it's virtually impossible to figure out 100% of a plan and then execute it, because the world around us changes, competition changes, our staff changes, opportunities change, competition changes. So let's accept the fact that we're going to have the basic premise and we'll get 75% of the way there. And so we can all feel like resiliency is part of the process.
I love it. I'm trying to picture you as a nervous fifth grader.
I am a nervous fifth grader.
That's a great analogy. Great analogy.
That might give you a better idea.
That's great. There's been challenges and hard conversations you've had to have with your business throughout the years. And at one point, you had to fire one of your biggest clients. Talk about what happened there.
I feel like throughout my life and career, the more I thought about, and Greg is exactly the same way, this sounds very trite, but as a door closes, it's another one's going to open, and we need to find our way. And there's always a way around it. And there always is a way around it. So when we started off, we had a really, really big client, and all they wanted us to do was broadcast. And it monopolized our time. And we knew that we didn't quit the radio business now to be doing infomercials for a bunch of financial companies. And that seemed like a step backward. And we needed the time to develop our digital presence. And so at that point in time, we had just maybe built, we were building a few websites, and we were creating some social media stuff, but not a lot. And we had decided that it's not the right relationship, and it's gonna ruin the growth and our aspirational goals. So we decided to say goodbye to that relationship without any net. And it was truly a burning of the boats scene where I'm not going to say it wasn't scary, but there was never a time really that we had doubt. There was plenty of times where we were really, really frustrated and super intense, but we realized now that we were freed, and it was purely up to us to apply our marketing skills and what we knew about the real opportunity and put the pieces of the puzzle together to build out a digital presence. And we started to do it like on a foundational level, and not tried ever to get too far ahead of our skis and build 10 digital platforms, but let's just build one, and let's do that really good. And then let's do the next one and devote all of our time, money, and attention to that.
That's a tough decision to make.
Yeah, it was. And we have this conversation a lot with clients, and that clearly was an extreme one. But, everybody has heard the expression, nothing can't be solved with time. Everything can be solved with time and money. And that's true, but it also requires a certain amount of will and tenacity and toughness and belief. And we just, from an intellectual standpoint, believed so much in, and everybody we would have the conversation with about what we were trying to build, we're like, that's a great idea. Why doesn't anybody have that? Well, the reason why nobody had it was because it was hard, and it took us a really long time. In fact, when we did our first full year of data mining from email automation, which was for us a Herculean effort. And we probably had 5 or 6 clients tied into our email and data platform. We're sending out hundreds of thousands of emails. We had millions and millions of data points. And after the first year, we did this big lead attribution study, and we were trying to figure out a nugget that we might have learned. And we literally didn't learn anything. And we're like, that sucked. And, but we realized that, all right, we're not like, there's definitely something in here. We just need more data, and we're not looking at it the right way. And so we traveled the United States and had conversations with lots of really smart data people, way, way, way smarter than we are. And we learned that it's going to take a little bit of time, and how are we interpreting data, and what should we be expecting from that data? And it took about another year. And now we're like 4 or 5 years into this, where we still didn't necessarily have a trophy. And then all of a sudden, after that second year of lead attribution, we're like, wow, we were able to find some amazing stuff now with proof of concept, that it was like flipping a switch. And everybody that we talked to about it, suddenly nobody was taking a risk on us at that point. They were like, this is very provable a concept. But it took 4 years from the time we walked in the door.
That's dedication. A lot of times, John, what people think their biggest disadvantage can be a strength. And one of the things you help companies do is kind of create and boil down what their brand essence is. And you had a firm with young 30s, and what was their dilemma?
There were a few firms like this where their thing was, we're kind of young, we're in a business where the avatar for financial industry is somebody 60 with $1 million to invest, because you want to catch people when they're ready to retire, when they've got all their 401k to move, and they're a little bit older. And so they found themselves competing with people with gray hair. And that people were questioning like, gee, are you experienced enough? Our point was to totally lean into that. And I looked at, like at the time, my parents would look at young people like, gee, they're so much smarter today than we ever were. Isn't that great? Because they understand how to use technology, and everything else is old school. And doesn't that make sense to really, really lean into that? And, there's often lots of nuggets when it comes to things like that, where people try and mask something that really could be their biggest benefit, and how it is, and in their own mind, how are they positioning it, and do they really believe it? And in this case, 9 out of 10 times that scenario makes sense, because usually, and I remember, I'm still the same way because I haven't changed, but like when I was younger, I would tell people, I'm going to work my ass off for you. I might not have the most experience, but I'm going to work harder than anybody else is going to work for you. I'm going to learn faster than anybody else. You're not asking me to lift 500 pounds over my head. This is what you have are solvable problems. I'm going to get everybody I know around me to help solve this problem. And today, to how that relates to the people that we work with, they're experts at technology. They're going to work harder. They're going to have more time to invest in those clients. And so it really becomes a huge benefit rather than a negative.
I love it. John, I have one last question. Before I ask it, I want to just point people to loanbeacon.com to learn more, and you can check out their story. And I encourage everyone to actually go to their Who We Are page. They have some great, when you hover over them, you can see the different gifts. I love just the personality of your company, just looking at that page. So the one that I did not predict was Casey Dean. I was not expecting that gift out of all the ones, but the rest seem to be, what I had expected in some realm. But so you'll have to go to their Who We Are page and just hover over Casey Dean to see if that's what you would expect on that one. But last question, John, is just favorite, again, throughout your career in the company, you're learning from different people, different individuals. I'd love to hear any books, podcasts, resources that you've looked at that have helped you on your journey in business, or it could be life in general.
I would say there are a couple. One I go back to is Good to Great. And the famous flywheel chapter is one, like, it's a staple, and I use it almost every day because it's so important. And then also, like, going back to the example we used about leaning into what should be your strengths, I think that's a good one, because I think people sometimes don't look inward enough to recognize really what their strengths are, broadcast against the template of the world and competitors. And then what do you do with that? So that's really good. I'm reading Rick Rubin's book right now, which is really a business book, but it's very ethereal, I would say. And I will say also, like, hippie-ish from a business standpoint, but and it's really about creativity. And I look at that as this is going to sound maybe crazy, but I look at what we do as a form of artistry and creativity, and creative people win. And how can you bring your creativity to life, and how can you execute that creativity? And there's something to be said for creative problem solvers, and creativity can manifest itself in so many different ways. And so I like his book because it's very much about gems about how to inspire creativity. And I think that is too overlooked in business. And this, anyway, it's a great book to check out.
John, I wanted the first one to thank you. Everyone check out loanbeacon.com and more episodes of the podcast. And thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Jeremy.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sailing right now. I'm feeling like $100 grand.